Hello and welcome to the Series B podcast. I'm your host, Greg Pokricki. Your guest today is Rohit Gupta, Managing Director of Future Communities Capital, an early-stage venture capital firm in the Bay Area. Rohit has been a 43 North judge and is now invested in several Buffalo startups, including HELIX Intel. He's bullish on Buffalo's innovation economy, and you'll see why in our conversation here.
Excited to sort of chat about all things startups in Buffalo and everything in between.
Yeah, so for the uninitiated, tell us about Future Communities Capital.
Yeah, Future Communities Capital, we're an early stage VC fund, so most of our activity is pre-seed and seed, a little bit of Series A, but it's not really core for us. And we focus on legacy industries. So you think about like big, really tough, slow to change, slow to adopt change, which right now is kind of like everybody. If you believe in sort of the future of AI, like what isn't legacy at this point? Yeah, but a few key areas for us, we do a lot of healthcare, some supply chain, some climate, almost a generalist fund, but there's a few areas that we just kind of don't touch.
So I know part of the core or the ethos is to like find investments outside of the Valley, right? And that's how you got connected into Buffalo. You've made a couple different investments here in HELIX, I know, Finta, Ognomy. So really like, I want to start with what did you see in Buffalo specifically, and then get into those companies maybe. But like what piqued your interest about Buffalo? What got you investing here?
So a long time ago, I was a judge for 43 North, and they got me out there randomly. I'm pretty sure they found me off a pitch book, and Colleen was out here, and even more random, we were both in LA on the same day. And so I'm up here in the Bay Area, and we were both in LA, and she's like, do you want to meet? And I said, sure. And I didn't really understand why or what was going on or what the program was. We met, we got coffee, and she was kind of telling me about Buffalo. It's this emerging sort of ecosystem. And I said, yeah, I'm in. I want to check it out. Like I spent a couple years in upstate New York, so a little bit familiar, definitely spent a few weekends in Buffalo. I knew the area. I kind of knew that there was a lot of latent sort of like wealth, a lot of like a history of innovation and entrepreneurial vision. And it was an opportunity to kind of come out and learn more about what was happening there, and did that for a few years. And by the end of sort of my judging experience there, like I had friends in Buffalo, like like text people like, hey, I'm coming to town. We got to meet up. I was coming outside of 43 as well. Yeah. And now I genuinely have reasons to go to Buffalo. So it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. And then how did you get plugged into some of those specific companies, and what maybe drew you to investing in them?
Yeah, again, there's a single person. It was Pete Burkowski. So, I mean, everybody knows Pete. Everybody loves Pete. And
yeah,
he sent me an email one day like, hey, I'm leaving 43 and I got this startup. Would love to talk to you about it. And somehow it just sort of sat in my inbox for like a month. And finally I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. I missed this. And we got on the phone and with him and John and what they're building at HELIX. And so I joined HELIX, and John, founder-led intros are the way to do business, right? He's like, hey, I got this friend. He's at this company. It's in sleep. And, he's very respectful, not like, I need you to meet this guy. And I said, yeah, I get it. I would love to meet Ognomy. I did some homework around sleep apnea and did that deal too. And from there, it's just sort of been, a pretty good clip.
So you talked about, I get introduced to those two founders. It was like an individual each time. Beyond just those two companies, like broadly, as you think about investing and looking at and evaluating founders, like what do you look for in a founder? How do you kind of decide which founder to jockey? How do you start to evaluate them through those early conversations?
That's sort of the heart of the game, right? Like, and I think it depends where an investor is sort of putting their money. Because if I'm a late stage investor, obviously the people matter, the founders matter, hopefully they're still there. There's a different CEO, whoever's running it, but really the company's set, right? Product, they're already in market. Hopefully they're generating returns. It's a going concern. Company culture is there. It's like trying to turn an aircraft carrier at that point, right? But at early stage, it is so dependent on people. Because if, let's say you came to me, oh, I got this thing I want to do. Between that and launching and then sort of like taking off and sort of reaching orbit or something, it's going to pivot 5-10 times, right? And so if I hedge my entire bet on this product, this idea, and then that's what I love and that's what I want to back, it just doesn't work, right? It has to be about the people. Like, I'm probably an outlier in this sense that I will never invest in somebody I do not like. I have to personally like somebody and believe in them in order for me to say, I want to do this. I mean, my life is short. I guess I'm privileged in a way to say, like, I don't want to do business with people that I do not like, or I do not like the way they do business or treat people.
I've heard about you talk about in previous interviews or podcasts, like how much the people matter to building an ecosystem, especially in these somewhat more nascent cities outside of the valley. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and maybe what you saw in Buffalo early on and the idea of like people kind of helping each other out and laying the foundation for an ecosystem that we could build upon?
Well, that I think runs through an entirety of venture, no matter where you work. And I think the ecosystems that sort of really push that are ones that do well, right? And you come out here and people happily make intros. They don't think twice. And a lot of that is, like Brad Fell has that ethos of give first, help people without asking or thinking what's in it for me, just help people. But I think a lot of it is also just saying that it's not a zero-sum game, right? And I honestly believe it's almost accretive, right? Like when I help people, it's going to come back to me. Like I have no problem helping other people raise money because I don't feel that the pool is going to dwindle by helping somebody else raise money, and I think the best founders really push that. And I will say that, John DeWald, fantastic founder. Dude's awesome, right? And by him bringing Ognomy to me, like I have even more respect for him. There's something very real about saying like John can recognize talent. John can recognize other founders that are winners. And then like, what does that mean for his own team that he's saying like, oh yeah, sure, I get it. I know who I'm investing in, in terms of people, in terms of capital, in terms of whatever product.
I think Buffalo probably specifically or maybe uniquely, like we are the city of good neighbors, like the idea of that like easy intro, like zero hesitation. I think we have strengths in that area. And that's probably some of what you identified that encouraged you to want to invest here and keep coming back and, make friends here in Buffalo. I'm curious where you see opportunities where Buffalo could mature beyond that. You've talked about the ways in which those relationships help build the foundation of an ecosystem. What advice would you have to Buffalo for the next 5 years to really continue to grow and accelerate?
I'd probably pull on two threads. One is that it's easier than ever by like an order or two of magnitude to launch something. Right. I was talking with one of my investors yesterday, and he said now is the golden age of entrepreneurship because of and specifically Claude Code. Anybody can build anything, and I think Buffalo really has an entrepreneurial streak going back like 100 years, 100 plus years, 150 years maybe. Right. It's sort of there, and it's comes out in fits and spurts. But like I think you enable that sort of thinking and say, well, dude, you have an idea. Let's go build it. Let's go try it. It doesn't have to be some like 6 months to build an MVP or no, our MVP is done this week. We're going to go and try and sell this thing. And like a lot of it is saying, I'm going to solve my problem first. And then once I solve my problem, I know who the customers are, right? So that's one thing. Take more swings, right? Like the risk for me, if I'm a founder, the risk for me has gone down dramatically, right? Because it's not like, oh, I need to quit my job and spend 2 years. And then maybe at the other end of it, I can go get something. Now it's like, dude, we're going to try this out now. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, we're going to iterate again and again and again. And we're just going to get something that's really interesting. The other thread is really about capital. I mean, I think one of the reasons the Bay Area wins is because there are people to make introductions to. Right. And I mean, to the point where it's absurd the number of funds out here. We almost take it for granted. You go to a coffee shop in San Francisco, there's going to be a VC in there. Right. And it's just, there's so many avenues for raising capital here that the ecosystem kind of flows a little bit more easily, right? I mean, my advice to founders is come out here, spend a few weeks, spend a month, spend whatever, and just line up a ton of meetings, try and raise some money out here and just see how different it is than, like the ecosystem partners, the capital partners in Western New York are great, everyone talks to them. And once you sort of like, if I'm a founder, once I've sort of like gone through that whole Rolodex, I have to go outside anyways. It's not possible to sort of raise forever capital in Western New York. At some point, I need to leave. And I feel like the earlier you can diversify your capital stack, the better you're going to be in the long term.
So for those VCs that you're talking about that are kind of lining up in coffee shops out in California, like what do you think that they miss about Buffalo? What do they maybe underestimate about a city like Buffalo or maybe other kind of tertiary, like second tier cities?
I was born in San Francisco, right? And at some point, I looked around and I realized that almost everyone in this game in the Valley is not from the Valley. The Valley being the entire Bay Area. They're not from here. And so I kind of had this kind of light bulb, lightning, whatever moment where I said, if I can find founders before they move to San Francisco, I'll win. And so that really led to this search of what are some locations, what are geographies that are rich in talent, whether it's technical talent, whatever business talent, idea, whatever, but really underdeveloped. And I think for me, like Buffalo it's probably my second biggest location after like LA, And so it's got universities, right? So a lot of smart people come out of schools. And it's like, well, what do you do with these smart people? Because they're young, they're ambitious. Do we let them is there a brain drain, or can we sort of keep them in Buffalo? And I made the point before, I think last time I was in Buffalo and I was giving a talk, I made the point that you shouldn't have to blow up your life to build a startup, because a lot of us are, you have some experience, you have a family, you have a partner, you have kids, you have all this sort of stuff. And you shouldn't have to throw all that away and say, I'm going to go move to the West Coast, 3,000 miles away just to pursue this thing. If you want to, that's great. By all means, the weather's better here. You should do it. But if you don't want to, or you can't, or whatever, that shouldn't exclude somebody from pursuing their dreams. And I think that there are just a lot of founders who are not going to make that move and saying like, hey, I will support you where you are. I'm coming to you. I think that's important to founders. And I think that unlocks a whole lot of opportunities to deploy funds that otherwise I'd be sitting on the sidelines and just saying like, well, I'll talk to you when you move here. I've definitely had funds say like, well, like friends who pitch a fund, like they want me to move to SF, what do you do with that?
Right. What's another kind of second tier market that you think is doing a really good job? Like, I think sometimes we get caught in this cycle of looking at like Boston, New York City, San Francisco. That's not the most realistic or attainable goal for a city like Buffalo. What's a city that you think is doing well that, we could actually like aspire to be and take some real like concrete learnings from?
Yeah, well, so there's almost two things that are happening, right? There's a lot of cities that sort of in and of themselves have access to capital or talent or something, and it's just kind of organically happening, right? So you could probably put Miami in that bucket because there's capital in Miami, and I think there's tax laws or something that make it easier to want to do these things there. Los Angeles as well. They probably don't want to be called a second tier city, but I think a lot of folks would just say you just don't have the depth that the Bay Area does. Again, they have capital, they have a lot of talent. I went to school in LA and I'm very bullish on USC forever, fight on. But beyond that, I don't see a lot of cities that intentionally try and build this, right? So in the former category, they're just sort of the ingredients to make a good ecosystem. But to sort of take the next step and say, well, we're going to really push this hard and we want to build this as part of our civic infrastructure, right? I think, Canada, they make it pretty easy to get funding up there through the provinces. Like I've had a couple startups go through the province of Nova Scotia, which honestly, like I think a lot of Californians couldn't find on a map, like it's so far east, but they want you to move up there, and they have PhD level talent that, they will send your way. They have industry that they will send your way. And like, I'd say that's kind of similar to Buffalo, right? You have world-class universities, you have industry there, right? And so you start saying, well, we're going to connect the dots. And then you throw in a program like 43 saying, we're going to financially incentivize companies to come here. And then you start saying like, well, there's a bunch of funds, there's all this other players in the ecosystem, like Jack Greco's a beast. You start getting a couple guys like him, they come in off the sidelines and say, well, we're going to build this ourselves. The same mindset that a founder has is what, probably makes Jack wake up in the morning and do what he does. So there's a little bit of intentionality there. And then there's a little bit of sort of just having the right ingredients.
You touched on some of the ingredients that Buffalo maybe innately has, like the talent ecosystem, the universities, and especially like the existing industries? I know like your fund specifically, targets like legacy industries to invest in. And I think it probably is counterintuitive to like at least maybe the trope of like startup culture of chase the shiny thing. What attracted you to kind of that lane? Like, why does that make you excited to invest? And what ways has that, like some of the success that you've seen, guided that principle?
Legacy industries, it's sort of a flip way of saying there's opportunity, right? Because you have a giant industry that for whatever reason has not innovated or changed, right? And so I don't think that startups necessarily have to go 0 to 1 every single time. This isn't about creating, the next whatever. It's about saying, here's a process, here's an industry, here's something that we can, improve within the same framework. Dr. Rifkin, founder of Ognomy, been a sleep doctor for 20 something years. And he was early, super early as a neurologist to say, I'm going to focus on sleep. And he said, I'm going to go brick and mortar because that's what everybody did. And then eventually said, I'm not serving enough people. There are way more people with sleep problems than I can ever service through brick and mortar. Very mission driven. And I mean, I love mission driven companies. And he said, I'm going to do this. He's, to the point of saying like he has this entire book of business as a brick and mortar operation. So I'm okay with cannibalizing that because it's going to improve patient outcomes. So telehealth for sleep apnea. If he wasn't the first, he's still one of the only clinically proven sleep companies out there, sleep startups. Because so many of them are like, we'll give you a relaxation thing, or, like try this mattress or this, audio, whatever. I'm not saying those aren't useful. I think a lot of people do have non-clinical sleep, improvements they can make. But for that dude to just jump like that, if that's your talent, that is your entrepreneurial vision, that is, access to capital.
What's a maybe legacy industry that's on your mind that you think might be ripe for disruption, or maybe that you're not involved in but would like to get involved in?
I think there's opportunity in places that are just like a lot of opportunities obvious, right? I think right now, because we're probably going to face some shortages across the board because of what's happening in Iran, how does that change things on sort of the near term, but also the long term? Because there's an opportunity now to sort of affect change that just doesn't get undone, right? And so specifically, like one example that we've been thinking a lot about is electrification. If oil really starts to spike, in California, we're already over $6, and I've seen $7 a gallon in a couple places. What does that do, and how does that sort of change our thinking on electric vehicles or grid infrastructure or just charging? It's already hard enough for a lot of people to charge an EV, and then you're like, if you sort of take the number of EVs, double it, triple it, quadruple it, where are these people going to charge? And so it's sort of thinking and like playing out, well, this is going to happen, and what are the secondary, tertiary, quaternary effects of that become really interesting to us.
Well, I think the clean energy transfer space is probably where Buffalo's seen some of the most success, maybe a little bit more on like the kind of intersection of like tech and manufacturing, but it's been a sweet spot for a city like ours, kind of changing like, the Rust Belt to the Green Belt type of thing.
Totally. I mean, there's so much, it's interesting because people try and portray climate as like this doom and gloom thing. But if you look at it from an opportunity standpoint, decarbonization, there's so much money in it, right? Or trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. Like we've been looking a lot at cloud seeding, right? And if you don't know cloud seeding, or your viewers or anyone doesn't know, it's the ability to sort of coax rain out of the sky, And it's one of those things where it's already happening. One part of our deep dive was sort of digging into cloud seeding. You might think that like this is a little far-fetched, but it's already happening in most of the West, and it's definitely happening in California. And so what does that mean to say like, well, the effect of not doing this, like I don't know if you're a skier, but this year's ski season was cut short, right? California ski resorts have been closing for weeks now. I think Colorado, Utah, some of the worst snowpack they've ever seen. These are all direct effects of climate. Or let's say you don't even believe in climate change. Okay, you don't believe in it. Do you want to ski? Right? You can't say, well, the ski season's shorter, but it's not, right? Like it's very clearly it's shorter. Historically, it's been getting shorter. And if I can make it snow, what does that mean to people who want to ski? What does that mean to snowpack? what does that mean to just, precipitation in general?
I think this parlays pretty well into the last thing I wanted to touch on with you, which is just AI. And you touched on that earlier. You mentioned the ways in which it can speed up the velocity of founding a company, right? And cutting down just the amount of time that it takes and maybe even burden that it puts on founders. I'm curious, like in that landscape where it's easier for maybe anybody to do this or start a company, like, right, earlier you talked about the value of talent in the individual. Like, how do you sort out like what's a real opportunity in kind of this fast changing landscape, which versus something that feels kind of cobbled together or maybe, too quick, not as thought out?
I'm not sure that that's the actual divide anymore, right? Because if you can take something that's not as thought out, build it in a weekend, launch, and get immediate feedback, then that loop becomes so short that the founder figures out real quick whether there's something there or not. So are we necessarily investing in a bad idea? No, I think it ends up we're investing in this person's vision or what they want to, I guess, riff on, in a sense. But the larger context here is that what is it that makes founders successful? It's not product per se, right? And I mean, I've seen this too, where team spends time building something very thoughtfully, comes out with a product that's interesting, launches it, and then anybody can copy it within days, right? Now, does that copycat have legs? Probably initially, but it comes down to like, what were they thinking, right? If it's just, I'm going to copy this, how are they going to improve that product down the line? What does V2 look like, So the first mode is just sort of like vision, taste, design, aesthetics, UI, all that sort of, you can bundle all that together. And then your second mode becomes sort of distribution, right? Because we kind of look for kind of your earlier question as well, the kind of end of one founder, right? The founder says, I'm the only person who can solve this problem and I'm going to go do it. So one of my favorite companies, a company out of LA, this founder, Amantha, she worked in pharmacies for like 20 years, non-technical founder, brilliant person, non-technical, right? And she said, the problem that I want to solve is independent pharmacies waste a lot of product because they don't really have inventory management. Crazy to believe, but they buy drugs and they just sit on the shelf. And if nobody buys it, they just expire. Insane to think about, right? But that's the way the industry goes. And she said, I'm going to solve this problem because I'm going to enable pharmacy A to sell to pharmacy B. Purely inventory management and APIs, right? Internally, we know what's on the shelf, and then externally we can offer that to sell to other pharmacies. Her distribution becomes her moat, because let's say that I said, I'm gonna go build this product. I'm gonna clone this. I promise you, any pharmacy that I walk into, they're gonna be like, you're a suit. We don't trust you. We don't like you. Before I even offer or talk to them about it, they're just like, yeah, whatever, dude. Not interested. Right. She walks into pharmacies, she walks out with the customer because she said, I know you. I know your problems. I know exactly what your life is like. I'm here to help you. And they trust her, right? That distribution is such an edge. You can't replicate that. She's an N of one founder. There's nobody else that could do that. That's kind of what we look for. Dr. Rifkin, same thing. Nobody else could do it.
Well, yeah. And it goes back to, I think, where we started the conversation on the value of the founder and the people behind it. So I think that's an awesome point to leave it with you. I really appreciate your time and all your insights. Before I let you go, we are ending on a segment that we call Last Call, which is a couple hard-hitting questions for you to wrap us up. So first, what is your favorite productivity tool right now?
Claude Code.
All right. Good choice. You're a guest on a podcast right now. What speed at which do you listen to podcasts?
I find it really hard to listen to podcasts and do other things because I end up getting so pulled in that I just can't do it. I'm not a big podcast listener. I just can't work and listen to podcasts. Something's going to suffer. I will tell you that my nephew graduated from college a couple of years ago, and I hope his parents aren't listening, but he told me he listens to all his lectures at 3x. And I was like, that's insane. I cannot. 3. I was like, bro, are you serious right now? Like, do you actually learn anything? And he was adamant that he retained something, but he graduated, he has a job, so we're very proud of him.
All right.
Sounded crazy to me.
Worked for him. All right, what's your go-to coffee order?
So I'm actually not a big coffee drinker. I never drank coffee. Then I had kids, and then there were just some days where I just sort of needed it. Now I drink a decent amount of caffeine, probably unhealthy amounts on my meeting days. So I'll stack meetings, and like every hour on the hour is another meeting and another cup of coffee. If I'm drinking coffee, it is just a decaf oat latte. I cannot drink cup after cup of caffeine and expect to like walk in a straight line. If I'm not drinking coffee, it's usually an oat matcha, and I'm a little snobby about how they make the matcha. But my go-to here in Berkeley, there's a place that sells chai, and so I'll go there. And at first I convinced myself, like, I really wanted to believe that chai had less caffeine than coffee. That is absolutely not true. But they make a quality cup of chai.
Two more quick ones for you. What's a book or TV show that you'd recommend?
Okay, so I have my standard list of books: Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. Chris Voss wrote Never Split the Difference. It's just a book on negotiating. It's extremely valuable. I think that the way that everyone should approach negotiations, like a lot of times what we think are negotiations really aren't. And so like an example that I'll use is like founders will often walk into a meeting and say, well, my valuation, I want something between 12 and 15. Guess what answer I'm picking every single time? 12. I'm
Right.
never gonna like why would I pick 15? Like if you're giving me the choice. And it's helpful to have a better understanding of how to negotiate. What did I recently read? The Art of Gathering. I just finished that one. It was pretty interesting. How to throw meaningful sort of events. There's another one I'm partway through, 8 Million Ways to Happiness. I just randomly picked it up at the library. It's super interesting if you like Japan and Japanese culture and want a better understanding.
All right, last question for you. You've been to Buffalo a bunch. We just talked coffee shops. How about chicken wings? Drumstick or flat?
I don't eat meat. Yeah. Buffalo actually has really good vegan food.
Yeah, it's a great foodie town.
Yeah, it's punches well above its weight class.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time.
Yeah, dude, appreciate your time, man. We'll talk soon. I'll see you next time I'm in town.